The Intersystem Diplomatic Academy existed in that peculiar space between ambition and desperation. Built on Station Kara 7, a spinning wheel of metal and misplaced optimism, it served as the galaxy's most earnest attempt at teaching predators and prey to share conference rooms without anyone getting eaten. Literally or metaphorically, though the metaphorical casualties still required therapy. The station itself hung in neutral space, equidistant from 17 different star systems, because apparently nobody trusted anyone else enough to host the galaxy's future diplomats. Fair enough. The last time the Vrelniks offered to host an interspecies summit, 3 delegations went missing, and the Vrelniks claimed it was a cultural misunderstanding about buffet arrangements. The investigation was still ongoing. The delegates were still missing. Inside Lecture Hall 7, Professor Fendrick arranged his data tablets with the obsessive precision of someone whose species had survived by being extremely good at noticing when the grass moved wrong. He was Malorian, all soft gray fur and enormous eyes positioned for maximum peripheral vision, the kind of evolutionary design that screamed, "My ancestors were lunch for 10 million years and were still touchy about it." He taught advanced interspecies diplomacy, which was a fancy way of saying he tried to explain to various predator species why eating your negotiating partners was considered poor form in most treaties. The students filtered in according to an unspoken but universally understood arrangement. Prey species claimed the front rows, close to exits, within sprinting distance of panic buttons. Predators lounged in the back, sprawling across seats meant for smaller species, radiating casual menace like cologne. Nobody acknowledged this arrangement. That would require admitting it existed, and admitting it existed would mean acknowledging that 10,000 years of civilization hadn't actually overridden several million years of evolution. The galaxy preferred comfortable lies. Rexith, a Vrelniks whose scales reflected light in that specific way that said, "My species invented the food chain," occupied his usual position in the back left corner. 7 feet of muscle and teeth and entirely too much confidence. His people had ruled their homeworld's apex predator niche so thoroughly that they'd actually gotten bored and invented philosophy. Then poetry. Then interstellar travel, mostly to find new things to philosophize about. The poetry was, frankly, terrible, but nobody was brave enough to tell them. Next to him sat Kethrol and Kethrol, because their species had 2 names per individual for reasons involving gender fluidity and religious tradition that took 3 hours to explain properly. They looked like someone had crossed a tiger with a shadow and given it 6 limbs and an attitude problem. Their homeworld had 3 moons and 4 distinct predator niches, and the Kethrol had claimed all of them through a combination of pack tactics and what anthropologists politely called aggressive territorial expansion. They were currently grooming one set of claws while pretending not to watch the door. Predators always watched doors. Exits were important when you might need to chase something or prevent something from escaping. Thrix occupied the back right, an orthymic who'd somehow gotten separated from their hive structure and decided to try this whole individuality thing that warm-blooded species kept insisting was important. They looked like a mantis designed by a committee that included both nightmares and geometry textbooks, all angles and chitin, and far too many joints bending in improbable directions. Their species had conquered their planet through sheer numbers and hive coordination, turning individual weakness into collective inevitability. Alone, Thrix was approximately as dangerous as any 7-foot-tall armored creature with blade arms could be, which was to say, extremely. The Quellen in the back center didn't have a name anyone could pronounce without 3 throats and a concerning amount of mucus, so everyone called them Cube. They represented an aquatic species that had evolved in depths where sunlight was a myth and everything either ate or got eaten, no middle ground. On land, they wore an environmental suit that made them look like a very aggressive water balloon with teeth. Their homeworld's oceans had prepared them for pressure, darkness, and sudden violence. Station life was, by comparison, relaxing. And then there was the human. She sat in the back row, far right, 1 seat away from the wall. Hadn't said a word since orientation 3 weeks ago. Didn't participate in the pre-lecture socializing that even predator species engaged in. Just arrived exactly 4 minutes before each session, took the same seat and watched. Always watching. Rex Sith's inner eyelid flickered, an involuntary response he'd been trying to suppress for 3 weeks. Every single class, the same reaction. His hindbrain, that ancient reptilian core that had kept his ancestors alive when the volcanic plains ran red with blood and ash, screamed at him that something in this room was wrong. Dangerous. Needed to be dealt with before it dealt with him. The logical part of his brain, the part that had earned him top marks in comparative xenobiology and tactical negotiation, insisted this was ridiculous. The human was small, barely over 5 feet, maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Soft skin, no natural weapons, eyes positioned for depth perception rather than peripheral awareness. Her species had only achieved interstellar travel 2 centuries ago, practically yesterday in galactic terms. They were newcomers, barely past the please don't touch anything important stage of galactic integration. So why did every predator instinct he possessed track her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered? Kethril and Kethril had the same problem. Both of their names felt it, which was concerning because when both names agreed on something, it usually involved violence or mating, and neither seemed applicable here. Their ear analogs kept swiveling toward the human's position, independent of conscious control. Pack hunting instincts, refined over millennia of coordinating takedowns of prey 3 times their size, insisted she was the threat. Not the Vrelnix with his massive jaw strength. Not the Orthimic with blade arms. The small, quiet human who hadn't done anything even remotely threatening. Thrix's compound eyes provided 340-degree vision, which meant they couldn't not see her. Every micro-movement registered. The way she breathed, slow and controlled. The way her eyes tracked movement with almost mechanical precision. The way she held absolutely still in a manner that no prey species ever managed. Prey fidgeted. Prey showed nerves. Prey advertised their anxiety through 1,000 tiny tells that predators had evolved to recognize and exploit. The human sat like a stone, and it was wrong in ways that bypassed logic and went straight to ancient instinct. Q didn't have traditional vision, relying instead on a combination of thermal sensing and electromagnetic field detection that let them hunt in absolute darkness. The human registered as a warm signature. Nothing special, except for one detail that Q's conscious mind kept trying to rationalize away. Her cardiovascular rhythm. In 3 weeks, through 6 lectures, including 1 surprise pressure test simulation where half the class had panic responses, the human's heart rate had varied by less than 5 beats per minute. Q's species had evolved hunting prey that could camouflage perfectly, that could match the darkness, that could hide from every sense except the one that mattered, the electromagnetic pulse of a terrified heart. They'd learned to read fear like a language. The human's cardiac signature read like a flat line on a dead, calm sea. Nothing living should be that controlled. Professor Fendrick cleared his throat, a gesture he'd adopted from human instructors despite lacking actual human anatomy. It worked. The predators stopped pretending they weren't watching the human and started pretending to pay attention to him instead. Small victories. Today we continue our examination of evolutionary psychology in diplomatic contexts, he began, manipulating the holodisplay with practiced ease. Images of various species appeared, arranged in a tree structure that looked less like biology and more like a menu at a particularly aggressive restaurant. Specifically, how predator and prey dynamics influence negotiating positions even in species that have theoretically evolved past such base instincts. Rexith managed something like a smile, showing teeth. Theoretically, right. Consider the Malorian approach to resource negotiation, Fendrick continued, highlighting his own species on the display. We prefer collaborative frameworks, shared resource, pools, group consensus. Our evolutionary heritage as herd species creates an instinctive comfort with collective decision-making. We survived by staying together, by moving together, by making decisions that prioritized group survival over individual advantage. He shifted the display to show a Vrelnik's territorial dispute from 2 centuries ago. Contrast this with apex predator species. Vrelnik's negotiating strategy emphasizes individual strength, direct confrontation, clear hierarchical structures. You survived by being the biggest, strongest, most dangerous thing in your territory. Your diplomatic instincts reflect this. You respect strength. You respond to displays of power. You interpret collaboration as potential weakness. Rexith didn't disagree. Accurate, if somewhat uncomfortable when said out loud. Neither approach is superior, Fendrick said, which was exactly what a prey species would say, but he wasn't wrong. Both are valid frameworks shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Effective diplomacy requires recognizing these instincts in yourself and others, then choosing whether to lean into them or compensate for them. The human shifted slightly in her seat. Just a small adjustment, probably unconscious, definitely insignificant. Every predator in the room tracked the movement. Heads turned by millimeters, pupils dilated, attention sharpened. Fendrick noticed. He'd been noticing for 3 weeks. His teaching style had developed an unconscious pattern. Make a point. Check if the predators were still watching the human instead of him. Continue anyway. For your practical exercise today, he said, bringing up a new scenario on the display. You'll work in assigned pairs to negotiate a resource-sharing agreement. The scenario involves a disputed mining operation on a border world. Both parties have legitimate claims. Both parties need the resources. Neither party wants to back down. Names appeared on the display, random assignments generated by the station's AI. Rexith found himself paired with a nervous Pelixian who was already sweating, which seemed unfair since they hadn't even started yet. Kethral and Kethral got matched with an enthusiastic Dendrite, who probably thought enthusiasm could substitute for strategy. Thrix's partner was a cautious Malorian who looked ready to bolt. The human's name appeared last, paired with Q. Perfect. The human who triggered every predator instinct in the room, matched with an ambush predator from a world where everything was either predator or food. What could possibly go wrong? The class broke into pairs, moving to smaller conference pods that ringed the main lecture hall. Each pod was soundproofed, equipped with negotiation tools and monitoring equipment that would record their attempts at diplomacy for later analysis and public humiliation. Educational public humiliation, but still. Q flowed into their assigned pod, environmental suit making soft aquatic sounds that their homeworld's prey had learned to fear. The human followed, moving with an economy of motion that Q's predator brain categorized as efficient in ways that weren't comforting. She took a seat, arranged her data tablet, and waited. Q waited too. Waiting was what their species did best. In the abyssal depths, patience meant survival. Rush toward prey, and the pressure waves gave you away. Wait, stay still, let them come to you, strike when the moment was perfect. Q could wait for hours, days. Had once waited 4 weeks during a training exercise before their instructors admitted they'd forgotten about them. The human spoke first. We should probably start. Her voice was quiet, controlled, with an accent that Q's translator struggled to place. Earth had 7,000 languages and twice that many regional variations. because apparently humans had spent most of their development period too busy killing each other to standardize communication. The galaxy found this both horrifying and somehow completely unsurprising. Yes, Q managed, activating the scenario display. The mining dispute. Both of our factions claim legal right to the deposits. Both need the resources for infrastructure development. Standard zero-sum conflict. Doesn't have to be zero-sum, the human said, studying the data with eyes that moved in rapid, systematic patterns. Reading, analyzing, categorizing. The deposits contain 17 different mineral types. It's unlikely both parties need all 17 in equal measure. Q felt something click in their tactical cognition. She was right. The scenario was designed to look like binary conflict, but the resource diversity suggested room for negotiation. Prioritization analysis, Q said. Each party identifies their critical resources. We negotiate partition based on actual need rather than arbitrary territorial claims. Efficient, the human agreed. Faster than traditional positional bargaining, lower risk of escalation. We'd need verification protocols to ensure honest reporting of needs. They worked through the scenario with a precision that felt less like diplomacy and more like surgery. The human suggested frameworks. Q stress-tested them against their tactical training. They refined and adjusted. 30 minutes in, they had a preliminary agreement that satisfied both parties' actual needs while sacrificing nothing but ego and the pretense that this had to be a fight. "You're good at this," Q observed, and immediately wondered why they'd said it. Complimenting potential threats wasn't standard predator behavior. The human smiled slightly. First time Q had seen that expression on her face. It was not comforting. "My species has a lot of practice negotiating with predators." "Your world had predator species?" Q asked, genuinely curious now. The human homeworld data was restricted, classified above Q's clearance level, which was itself suspicious. Most species happily shared evolutionary history. Helped explain why they were the way they were. Earth had several apex predators, the human said carefully. Big cats, bears, wolves, crocodilians, various others depending on region and era. And your species outcompeted them? That was impressive for a species without natural weapons or armor. Not exactly, the human said. And something in her tone made Q's threat assessment instincts spike. We just made them irrelevant. Before Q could ask what that meant, the exercise timer chimed. Session over. Return to main hall for group discussion and analysis. The pairs filtered back to the lecture hall, various levels of success evident in their body language. Rexith looked satisfied. His Pelixian partner looked traumatized. Kethral and Kethral seemed pleased. Their Dendrite partners seemed confused about how they'd lost so thoroughly while everyone stayed friendly. Thrix and their Malorian partner had apparently achieved some kind of detente based on mutual resignation. Fendrick reviewed each negotiation, providing commentary that was both educational and gently devastating. When he reached Q and the human session, he paused. Interesting approach, he said, displaying their agreement framework. You avoided the territorial dispute entirely and restructured the scenario as a resource optimization problem. Effective, though it requires both parties to be honest about their needs. In the real world, that's not always guaranteed. In the real world, the human said quietly, speaking for the first time in group discussion, you verify, trust, but verify. Rexith's head swiveled toward her. That phrase. He'd heard it before, somewhere in the human historical database. Some ancient Earth leader during a period of global tension, when humans had enough nuclear weapons to sterilize their own planet and had come terrifyingly close to using them. Trust, but verify. The diplomatic framework of a species that had learned the hard way that sometimes your own kind was the most dangerous thing in the room. Cultural reference? Fendrick asked, curious. Old saying from my homeworld. The human confirmed. From a time when we were negotiating agreements where mistakes meant extinction. The room got quieter. Species that had never faced true extinction pressure had trouble understanding what it did to evolutionary psychology. The Vrelniks had dominated their world so completely they'd never faced existential threat. The Kethril had been apex predators from the beginning. The Orthimic had numbers that made individual death irrelevant. The Quellan had the ocean depths, vast and protective. What did it do to a species when the greatest threat came from themselves? Moving on, Fendrick said, perhaps sensing dangerous territory. For your assignment this week, I want you to research a species not your own. Understand their evolutionary pressures, their predator-prey dynamics, how it shapes their modern diplomatic approach. Cross-species understanding begins with acknowledging that we're all carrying evolutionary baggage, whether we admit it or not. The lecture ended. Students dispersed according to the same unspoken patterns. Prey species left first, quickly, eyes on exits. Predators followed, slower, maintaining awareness, never quite turning their backs on each other. The human packed her tablet, stood, moved toward the door with that same economical motion that Q had noticed earlier. Rexith made a decision that was probably stupid. He'd made a lot of those lately. Came with the territory of being young, male, and Vrelniks. Wait, he called out. The human paused, turned, met his eyes directly, which prey species never did. Eye contact with the Vrelniks was threat display. She held his gaze like it meant nothing. I wanted to ask. Rexith started, then realized he had no idea how to finish that sentence. Wanted to ask what? Why do you make every combat instinct I have scream danger signals? Why does a species with no natural weapons trigger predator threat assessment? Why did your people develop nuclear weapons before space travel and somehow survive? Yes? She prompted, patient. Your assignment. Rexith pivoted, finding safer ground. Which species are you researching? Vrelniks, the human said simply. Your people have interesting evolutionary history. Volcanic plains, megafauna competition, territorial expansion through direct combat. Your diplomatic style makes more sense when you understand you evolved in an environment where showing weakness meant death. Rexith felt his scales ripple, involuntary response to accurate threat assessment. And what are you finding? That your people are predictable, the human said, not unkindly. Your threat displays follow consistent patterns. Your negotiating tactics rely on intimidation and direct power assertion. It works because most species respond to those signals instinctively. But predictability is vulnerability. An opponent who understands your patterns can counter them. This should have felt insulting. Instead, it felt like having his combat instructor point out a flaw in his guard. Helpful, if uncomfortable. And your species? What patterns do you follow? The human smiled again, that same not quite comforting expression. We don't, that's the problem. She left before he could ask what she meant. Kethril and Kethrol had been listening, because pack hunters always gathered intelligence. That was unsettling. Both names agreed. She's analyzing us, Thrix observed, their compound eyes tracking the human's departure. All of us. Has been since day one. Pattern recognition behavior. Q added, having approached without anyone noticing because ambush predators were terrifying like that. She watches, categorizes, builds threat models. My species does the same thing when mapping new hunting grounds. Humans are prey species, though. Rexith objected, though the objection felt weaker every time he made it. Binocular vision, no natural weapons, physical vulnerability. Every classification index puts them in the prey category. Classifications can be wrong, Thrick said. My hive studies xenobiology. We recently accessed the full Earth database. It was illuminating. Illuminating how? Kethral and Kethral asked. Give me a moment, Thrick said, activating their personal data tablet and pulling up files with the kind of careful precision that suggested they'd been waiting for this conversation. Earth evolutionary history is complicated. The human classification as prey species is based on physical characteristics, but it ignores behavioral adaptation. Data started flowing across the shared display. Images of Earth, a blue-green world that looked peaceful until you examined the details. Earth is classified as a death world. Extreme environmental variation, high gravity, aggressive microbial life, significant megafauna. Humans evolved in the African Rift Valley approximately 2 million years ago, competing with some of the most successful predators in their world's history. Images appeared: lions, leopards, hyenas, crocodiles, each one looking like something from a combat designer's fever dream. Humans had no natural weapons, Thrix continued. No claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom. By every metric, they should have been eliminated. Instead, they developed tools, weapons, cooperative hunting strategies. They didn't outcompete Earth's predators through strength. They made strength irrelevant. More images: stone tools, spears, bows, firearms, nuclear weapons. An escalation curve that went from rocks to planet-killing weapons in the span of 10,000 years. But that's not the concerning part, Thrix said. And Rexith felt his combat instincts spike, because what could be more concerning than planet-killing weapons? The concerning part is persistence hunting. A video played. Humans chasing prey across open plains. Not fast, nowhere near as fast as the prey, just steady, relentless. The prey would sprint away, exhausted, collapse. Rest. The humans would catch up. The prey would sprint again, less far this time. Collapse again. The humans would catch up again. This continued for hours. The prey died of exhaustion. The humans just kept walking. They can run for days, Thrix explained. Their endurance capacity exceeds almost every other Earth species. They evolved to chase prey until it died of exhaustion. Their pursuit predators wearing prey species camouflage. The room got very quiet. There's more, Thrix said, because apparently the universe hated them all. Human history is 90% conflict. They spent millennia fighting each other with increasingly sophisticated weapons. Their technological development was driven primarily by military innovation. They reached their homeworld's moon because two rival factions were competing to weaponize orbital space. They developed computer technology to calculate missile trajectories. They created the internet for military communication. They achieved fusion, power while trying to make better bombs. More data flowed past. Wars, thousands of them. Humans fighting humans with bronze, iron, steel, gunpowder, chemistry, nuclear fire. A species that had nearly sterilized its own planet multiple times and somehow kept going. Every predator species in this station evolved to hunt prey. Thrix concluded. Humans evolved to hunt each other. That's what we're sensing. Not prey instincts, not predator instincts, something else entirely. Rexith felt his worldview shifting in uncomfortable ways. The teacher, Fendrick, he must know this. Why pair her with us? Why put her in classes with predator species? Because that's the point, Q said slowly, understanding dawning. The Academy isn't just teaching us to negotiate with each other. It's teaching us to negotiate with humans. They're integrating into galactic politics. We need to understand them before they become a major power, before we make mistakes based on assuming they're what they appear to be. She sits in the back row, Kethrol and Kethrol observed. We thought it was unusual. Prey species don't sit with predators. But she's not sitting with us. She's sitting behind us, where she can watch everything, where nothing can approach without her seeing it. Tactical positioning, Rexith realized. Back to the wall, clear sight lines, maximum information gathering. It's not prey behavior. It's not even predator behavior. It's combat behavior. They stood there, 4 apex predators from 4 different worlds, realizing they'd spent 3 weeks being studied by something that wore the shape of prey, but thought like a hunter. Something that had evolved in a world so hostile that it had weaponized endurance, cooperation, and innovation just to survive. Something that had then turned all those adaptations toward fighting itself, refining its capacity for violence across millennia of warfare. Next class, Q said finally. I'm sitting in the front row. Coward, Rexith said without conviction. Smart, Kethrol and Kethrol corrected. We evolved to hunt prey that ran. Humans evolved to hunt prey that couldn't run far enough. I think there's a lesson there about choosing your battles. The next class session opened with familiar rhythms. Fendrick arranging his materials. Prey species claiming front rows. Predators moving toward the back. Except this time, the back row stayed mostly empty. Rexith found himself choosing a middle row seat, telling himself it had better acoustics. Kethrol and Kethrol suddenly discovered an interest in being closer to the instructor. Q's environmental suit made apologetic gurgling sounds as they selected a pod near the front. Thrix claimed an aisle seat with excellent exit access, purely coincidental. The human arrived exactly 4 minutes before start time, scanned the room, and took her usual seat in the back right corner. Alone now, behind everyone. Fendrick noticed. His ears twitched in what might have been amusement. Interesting seating arrangement today. Has everyone completed their species research assignment? Enthusiastic nods from the prey species students. Reluctant acknowledgement from the predators. The human raised her hand slightly. Yes? Fendrick prompted. Question about the Vrelnik's research, the human said. Your territorial expansion period. You encountered 17 other predator species during your industrial age. Only 3 survived to modern day. The others went extinct. Was that intentional? Rexith felt every eye turned toward him. Fantastic. Nothing like having genocide brought up in casual academic discussion. Complex question, Fendrick said diplomatically. The Vrelnik's expansion involved competition for resources. Some species adapted, relocated, or found niches. Others didn't. Extinction is unfortunate, but sometimes inevitable when apex predators compete. Inevitable, the human repeated, tone neutral. Your people killed them. My people outcompeted them, Rexith corrected, defensive now. Survival of the fittest, natural selection, your own world understands this principle. My world understands it very well. The human agreed. We drove numerous species to extinction during our development. Megafauna that had survived millions of years disappeared within centuries of human expansion. We're very good at outcompeting other species. It's one of our least admirable traits. I wasn't judging, just confirming the pattern. Something about her tone suggested she was absolutely judging, just politely. The point of the assignment, Fendrick interjected, is understanding that every species carries historical baggage. The Vrelnik's expansion period shapes their modern approach to territory and resources. Human tribal conflicts shape their approach to group dynamics and loyalty structures. The Kethrol pack behavior influences their negotiating coalitions. We're all products of our evolutionary history, for better or worse. The lecture continued, but Rexith's attention kept drifting to the human sitting alone in the back row, behind everyone, watching everything. taking notes in patterns that probably analyzed them all with terrifying precision. He thought about persistence hunting, about prey that couldn't run far enough, about a species that had turned endurance into a weapon and cooperation into a tool for conflict, about a world so hostile that its dominant species had nearly destroyed itself multiple times and somehow kept going. The prey species in the front rows didn't understand why the predators had retreated. They probably thought it was some kind of dominance shift, social restructuring, typical predator politics. They didn't understand that something had changed in the calculus of threat. That the quiet human in the back row had gone from curiosity to something else entirely. Not prey, not predator. Something that had spent 2 million years learning to outlast, outthink, and out-cooperate everything else on a planet that tried very hard to kill it. Something that had then achieved sentience and decided the best use of that sentience was building better ways to compete with itself. Fendrick wrapped up the lecture with assignments for the week. Continue your species research. Next class will discuss how to recognize and compensate for your own instinctive biases during high-pressure negotiations. Bring examples of times when your evolutionary instincts might interfere with optimal diplomatic outcomes. Students dispersed. The human packed her materials, stood, headed for the exit. Rexith watched her go. This small figure who had somehow inverted an entire classroom social dynamic without saying more than a few sentences. She'd done nothing threatening, nothing aggressive, just sat quietly, watched, learned, and let them all figure out on their own what she represented. She knew. Kethril and Kethril said quietly, having appeared beside Rexith without warning because pack hunters were also terrifying. She knew we'd research her species, knew we'd find the data, knew it would change how we saw her. Manipulation? Rexith asked. Education, Kethril and Kethril corrected. She's teaching us the same lesson Fendrick is, that assumptions kill, that appearances deceive, that the galaxy is full of species we don't understand, and some of them are much more dangerous than they look. Think she'll stay in the back row? Q asked, joining the conversation. Probably, Thrix said. Tactical advantage. Information gathering. Plus, now she knows it bothers us. Psychological pressure. Very efficient. They stood there. 4 predators from 4 worlds. Discussing the human who sat in the back row silent. Who had somehow become the thing they tracked first. Not because of threat display or dominance posturing. But because every instinct they possessed recognized something that their conscious minds were only beginning to understand. Earth had sent its children to the stars. Soft-skinned, patient, endlessly persistent, carrying 2 million years of survival adaptations and 10,000 years of warfare refinement. They looked like prey. They thought like hunters. They fought like something that had learned the hard way that survival meant being willing to do whatever survival required. The galaxy was still figuring out what to do with that. Professor Fendrick filed his class notes, already drafting next session's curriculum. The predator students were learning finely. The human student was accelerating that learning through simple existence. Perfect. This was exactly what the Academy had intended when they'd started accepting human applicants. Let the predators feel what it was like to be watched by something that didn't blink first. Let them understand that apex predator status was contextual, not absolute. Let them learn that the small, quiet species in the back row might be the most dangerous thing in the room, not despite appearing harmless, but because of it. The Kerham galaxy had spent millennia assuming that predator species would dominate galactic politics, that strength and aggression would determine hierarchy, that the old rules of Fang and Claw would translate to conference rooms and treaty negotiations. Then the humans arrived, with their endurance and their weapons and their unfortunate habit of turning every problem into an optimization challenge. They didn't compete with predator species directly. They just made the old rules irrelevant, the same way they'd made Earth's megafauna irrelevant 10,000 years ago. Not through strength, through persistence, through cooperation, through being willing to chase a problem until the problem died of exhaustion. The next session, Rexith noticed, the back row stayed empty, except for one quiet human who sat in her usual spot and watched everything with patient, analytical eyes. Behind them all, tracking them first.